The call came on a Tuesday morning in October, while I was still in my robe, holding a cup of coffee that had gone cold on the kitchen counter. It was my father's estate attorney. 3 years of probate. 3 years of my brother contesting every clause. 3 years of depositions and mediation and late-night calls with lawyers, and it was finally over. My father's estate had been settled. After all legal fees, after splitting the liquid assets with my brother as my father had wished, my share came to $3,800,000. I sat down on the kitchen stool because my legs stopped working. I had known there would be an inheritance. My father had built his dental practice over 40 years in Columbus, Ohio, and when he retired, he had sold the building and the patient list and the equipment for considerably more than any of us expected. He was a quiet man who drove the same Buick for 11 years and never took a vacation that cost more than a tank of gas. He saved everything. He invested carefully. And when he died 2 years ago, he left behind more than any of us knew. But knowing it was coming and hearing that number are two very different things. My hands were shaking when I set down my phone. I pressed both palms flat against the counter and breathed. I thought about my father, the way he smelled like peppermint and antiseptic, the way he called me Maggie Bird even when I was 53 years old and sitting beside him at Christmas dinner. I thought about how proud he would have been to know that this money, the money of his entire quiet, disciplined life, was going to be safe with me. I wanted to share it with someone. I wanted to tell someone who would understand what it meant, not just the number, but the weight of it, the grief mixed into every dollar. My husband was the first person I thought of. 31 years of marriage. He was my person. He was who I called when anything happened, good or bad, for 31 years. I changed out of my robe, got in the car, and drove to his office. My husband is a project manager for a mid-sized commercial construction firm. His office is on the 4th floor of a glass building on the west side of the city, 20 minutes from our house. I had been there dozens of times over the years, birthday lunches, picking him up when his car was in the shop, dropping off forgotten items. His assistant knew me by name. She always kept a bowl of those orange-wrapped butterscotch candies on her desk, and she always offered me one. I parked in the visitor lot and took the elevator up. The assistant's desk was empty. She must have stepped away. The hallway was quiet. My husband's office is at the end, a corner office with windows on 2 sides. He was proud of that office. He had mentioned the windows specifically when he got the promotion 4 years ago. The door was not fully closed. I was already raising my hand to knock when I heard his voice. He was laughing, low and easy, the way he laughs when he is completely relaxed, when he does not know anyone is watching. I had not heard him laugh that way around me in longer than I wanted to admit. I stopped. I know, he said, but it won't be much longer. We talked about this. A pause. He was on the phone. She has no idea. Another pause, shorter this time. The timing has to be right. I've been very careful. My hand was still raised. I had not moved. Once the brother thing gets sorted out, there's going to be real money, and half of that is mine, legally. That's just how it works. He laughed again, but it was different this time. Harder. Satisfied in a way that made my stomach turn. 31 years qualifies as a long-term marriage in this state. I've already talked to someone. I lowered my hand. I love you too, he said. Soon. I walked back down the hallway. I pressed the elevator button. I rode down 4 floors and walked through the lobby and got back in my car and sat there in the parking lot with both hands on the steering wheel for a very long time. I did not cry. I want to be honest about that. I think I was too numb to cry, the way you are too numb to feel a bad cut for the first few seconds before the pain arrives. I sat there in that parking lot and I felt the world rearranging itself around me, the way it does when something you believe to be solid turns out to have been hollow the entire time. He had already talked to someone. He was waiting for the inheritance money to be confirmed. He had been careful. How long had he been careful? I thought about the last 4 years. I am a retired nurse practitioner. I spent 35 years watching people's faces for things they were not saying. I was trained to notice. And yet, I thought about the conference trips that started happening more frequently, 2, sometimes 3 times a year. I thought about the new gym membership 2 years ago and the way he had started caring about his clothes again, buying things without mentioning them. Things I noticed but told myself were just a midlife shift in taste. I thought about the nights he fell asleep downstairs because he didn't want to wake me. the way his phone was always face down, the way he had stopped asking about my day with any real interest somewhere around the time of my father's diagnosis. I thought about my father's funeral. My husband had stood next to me at the graveside in his dark coat, and he had held my hand, and I had thought, whatever else is hard right now, I have this. I have him. He had already been planning his exit by then. I was certain of it. I drove home. I did not call my husband. I did not send a message. I went inside. I sat at my kitchen table, and I called my best friend. She answered on the second ring. She has been my best friend since we were nurses together in 1989, and she is one of the few people in the world I trust completely. I told her what I had heard. I told her the exact words. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Maggie, do not tell him about the money. Do not say a word. Not today, not this week. Promise me." I promised. "And tomorrow morning," she said, "you call a divorce attorney, not a family friend, a real attorney, the best one you can find." I called one that evening. I found her through a former colleague whose messy divorce had been handled with what she described as cold, brilliant precision. I left a message and she called me back within the hour. We met in her office the next morning at 8 a.m. She was a small woman in her late 50s with silver-streaked hair and an expression that suggested she had heard everything and was surprised by nothing. I told her the whole story. She took notes on a yellow legal pad and did not look up until I finished. "The inheritance," she said, "has not been distributed yet? The call came yesterday morning, but the funds won't transfer for another 10 to 14 business days." She nodded slowly. "That is significant. In Ohio, an inheritance received during a marriage is generally considered separate property, not marital property as long as it is not commingled with shared accounts. But the timing and documentation matter. We need to move carefully." She explained what that meant. I listened to every word. Over the next 2 weeks, I did not change anything on the surface. I made dinner. I asked about his day. I slept on my side of the bed. I watched him across the kitchen table in the mornings, and I looked for it now, the small signs, the micro-expressions, the way his eyes slid away from mine a half-second too quickly. They were everywhere, once I knew to look. They had probably always been there. There was a Saturday in November of the year before my father died when my husband and I had driven up to my parents' house together for Thanksgiving. My father was already declining by then, moving slowly, quieter than he used to be. After dinner, my mother fell asleep in her chair, and my father and I sat on the back porch in the cold, wrapped in blankets, and he told me that the thing he was most proud of in his life was raising someone who knew her own value. "You always knew," he said, "even when you were small. You never let anyone tell you that you were less than what you were." I thought about that on the drive home. My husband had driven, and I had sat in the passenger seat, watching the highway lights and feeling grateful, feeling held. My father was complimenting something he saw in me, something real, and I had spent the following year slowly losing it without recognizing it was happening, making myself smaller, asking fewer questions, convincing myself that the distance I felt was just the ordinary settling of a long marriage. My attorney moved quickly. The inheritance funds were directed into an account in my name only, opened at a bank where my husband and I had no joint accounts. She filed the divorce petition 14 days after our first meeting. The morning the papers were served, I had already moved out of the house and into my daughter's guest room. My daughter is 40 years old and she lives 20 minutes away. When I told her the evening before the whole truth, all of it, including what I had heard in that hallway, she went very still the way she does when she is absorbing something difficult. Then she said, "Mom, I need to tell you something." She had suspected for over a year. She had seen a message on his phone once when he had left it unlocked on her kitchen counter during a family dinner. She had not known what to do with what she saw. She had told herself she might have misread it. She had been trying to protect me. We held each other in her kitchen for a long time. Then she made tea and we sat up until midnight making plans. I did not feel what I expected to feel when the papers were served. I expected rage, maybe, or grief. What I felt was clarity. The particular kind of clarity that comes when you stop waiting for something to make sense and accept it for what it is. My husband called my cell phone 11 times that day. I let every call go to voicemail and forwarded them to my attorney. He had hired his own attorney by then, of course. a man with an aggressive reputation and a practice that specialized in high-asset divorces. The first thing his attorney argued was that the inheritance was marital property because, he claimed, my husband had contributed to our household in ways that had allowed me to maintain my relationship with my father and be present for his final years. My attorney looked at me across the conference table when we read that claim, and her expression did not change, but something around her eyes said everything. "They're going to try to establish financial entanglement," she said. "We will show that there was none." There was none. My father's estate had never touched any joint account. The inheritance had never been used for shared expenses. The documentation was clean because the timing was clean. I had moved the day the funds cleared, before any marital money had touched it, before my husband could arrange what he had apparently been planning to arrange. He had been too careful about the wrong things. The deposition was 3 weeks later. I sat across a conference table from my husband for the first time since the morning he was served. He looked older than I remembered, which is a strange thing to think about a man I had seen every day. He did not look at me when I walked in. He arranged papers in front of him that he did not need, and he looked at those instead. His attorney asked me questions for 2 hours. My attorney had prepared me. I answered everything clearly and without hesitation. At one point, his attorney asked whether I had been aware of any extramarital relationship on his part, implying that my awareness might somehow be relevant to the asset question, and my attorney objected so cleanly and efficiently that the line of questioning stopped before it started. When it was over and we filed out of the conference room, my husband was standing in the hallway putting on his coat. We were 6 feet apart. It was the closest we had been since October. He looked at me then. Finally. And I want to be honest about what I saw. Not regret, not guilt, but something more like frustration. The look of a man who had miscalculated and knew it. "Maggie," he said. "Don't," I said, and I walked out. The divorce was finalized in the spring. The settlement gave him what Ohio law entitled him to his portion of the marital assets we had genuinely built together over the years, fairly and legally calculated, nothing more and nothing less. The inheritance remained entirely mine, properly documented as separate property received and secured before the commingling question became relevant. His attorney had fought hard on the inheritance. They argued every angle. It did not matter. The timeline was clear. My attorney was better, and I had not panicked and told him about the money in that hallway back in October. I had walked away. And that walk, those 30 seconds of holding myself together when I wanted to fall apart, had protected everything. He and the woman he had been on the phone with were together openly by the time the divorce was finalized. She is 22 years younger than he is. My daughter told me about it in the measured way she has of delivering news she thinks might hurt me. I thanked her and told her I genuinely did not mind. I meant it. That is the part that surprised me most. In the months after the settlement, I did things I had been quietly postponing for years. I signed up for a watercolor class that met on Tuesday mornings in a studio above a coffee shop downtown. I said yes when my best friend suggested a trip to Portugal that we had been talking about since we were in our 40s. I had dinner with my daughter every Sunday, and I did not rush home. I bought a smaller house, mine alone, with a screened porch and a garden that I am still learning how to manage. I thought about my father often. I thought about him sitting on the back porch in the November cold, telling me I had always known my own value. I had forgotten it for a while. I had let the forgetting happen slowly enough that I did not notice it going. But I had gotten it back, and I had gotten it back with interest, not because of the money, though the money was real and it mattered, and I was honest with myself about the fact that it mattered, but because of what I had done in that parking lot and every day after. I had not fallen apart. I had not confronted him before I was protected. I had not told him what I knew and handed him the chance to move first. I had called my attorney. I had listened. I had been patient. My father was a quiet man who built something real by being careful and disciplined and refusing to act from panic. I thought about that too. There is a thing that happens when a marriage ends, even a bad one, a marriage that had apparently turned against you years before it was over, and that thing is grief. I want to say that clearly, because I think sometimes women are expected to feel only relief when they leave a situation like this. And relief is real, but grief is also real, and it does not mean you made the wrong choice. I grieved the 31 years. I grieved the man I thought I had married. I grieved mornings and routines and the ordinary weight of a life built with someone, even when that someone had not been building it honestly. I let myself grieve it. I cried in my new house on a Sunday evening in June with a glass of wine and the back door open to the garden, and I let it go through me, and then I got up and washed my face and made myself dinner. The watercolor class was harder than I expected. My Tuesday morning instructor is a patient woman of about 70, who told me the first day that the most common mistake beginners make is fighting the medium, trying to control it into something they already envisioned, instead of watching what it becomes. Work with the water, she said. It knows where it wants to go. I thought about that more than I expected to, in the weeks after. About the things you cannot control, and the things you can, and the wisdom of knowing which is which before you act. My father's money sits in accounts that are growing quietly. Some of it I will use to live well, to travel, to take my daughter on a trip she has wanted to take for years, to make the garden into something I am proud of. Some of it I will never touch if I can avoid it, because it feels like the accumulated product of a whole life's worth of discipline, and I want to honor that. And some of it I donated to a fund my hospital's nursing school set up for students who need financial support to finish their degree, because I would not have the career I had and the independence it gave me without the nurses who trained me and pushed me when I needed pushing. When I told my daughter about the donation, she sat quietly for a moment and then she said, "Grandpa would have liked that." She is right. He would have. There are days now when I wake up in my house, in the room I have arranged exactly as I wanted it, with the morning light coming through windows I chose, and I feel something that takes me a moment to identify. Not happiness exactly, something quieter than that, and more durable. Something that does not require anything from anyone else in order to stay. I spent a long time building a life around someone who was building his exit while I wasn't looking. I spent those years believing that the distance between us was just age, or busyness, or the ordinary way long marriages settle into routine. I was wrong about that. But I was not wrong about myself, and that, in the end, was the only thing I needed to get right. I am 63 years old. I have a garden that does not yet know what it wants to become. I have a Tuesday morning class and a passport with 2 new stamps and a daughter who calls me every morning on her commute just to talk. I have my father's discipline and my own hard-won patience, and a house with a screened porch where I sit in the evenings and watch the light change. I have everything I need. It turns out that was true the whole time. I just had to clear away everything that was standing between me and knowing it.